We're going to talk about salary surveys. There's a lot of different places to get them. There's a whole list. They can be published, they can be custom, you get them online, internet, so on. There's a lot of different ways to get the information. When we're looking for salary surveys, the most important thing to do is to match to the labor market. So if we're hiring for administrative and clerical staff, are we going to want to look at national data, regional data, international data, or local data? Local, yeah. So this is just this little waterfall diagram that shows kind of where you're likely to want to find your survey data, where you want to align it. As you get into more the executive positions and the higher level professional positions, you may want to look at regional data or national data or international if you've got some real specialty positions. When you're picking salary surveys, be sure and match the labor costs. Make sure that the jobs are matched correctly. That is so important. I always want to get management input. We should be at least asking them if they have biases or specific things that they want. We want to make sure that the survey data that we're using is reputable. And is the survey data valid? But it's really important to make sure that the data that you're using is valid. Big sample size. I want to know who's participating in the survey. If I don't know who's participating in the survey, I may not want to use that. The question that I always ask when I get some salary survey information is, what is the reason that the survey is being conducted? What is the purpose of the survey? If they're serving their association members, for example, in the case of some of these nonprofits, right? And they're providing this service to members, that's a great explanation of why the survey was conducted. If it's maybe a temporary agency or some other thing, I always wonder, is there a hidden agenda here that I need to be aware of? So pay attention to that. Another big question is who participates in the survey? Now, some of you have seen surveys lately where there's employees are providing input to the salary surveys, and that always makes me a little bit nervous. How are the jobs matched? Job matching is huge. I see a lot of association surveys that just have job titles. Program manager, program assistant. I don't know what that means. What does that mean to you? So again, those of you who are working with those kinds of surveys, you have the ability to influence the way that they're conducting the surveys. There should always be a mini job description that describes the functions that are being performed by that particular job title. Who provides data to the survey, obviously. That's important. I like it coming from payroll or HR myself. Those guys actually know the real numbers. Sometimes other folks aren't quite so in touch. And then also, does the data reflect local market realities? We have the highest minimum wage in the nation in Washington State. If you're using national survey data for your entry-level positions, you're going to have problems. So your strategy for HR professionals, this is my recommended survey strategy. Identify the best surveys, there's an S at the end, that means more than one, for your organization. In World at Work, which is the Professional Association for Compensation People, they recommend 3 to 5 data matches for every position that you're looking at. 3 to 5. Purchase the same set of surveys each year so that you can see whether the numbers are moving up or down. I see people purchase a survey one year and then not next year and then the next year and then not. And what happens is then your watermark keeps moving. Your numbers keep moving and you can't really peg it. You really need to take the long-term view when you're working with the data. You really need to take the long-term view when you're doing that analysis. You could be off by $10,000 on one person and pay for every survey you want in the world practically. Another thing that's important also for you guys to remember is that the information that's out there varies widely, really, really widely. So I did this side-by-side analysis of a bunch of different sources a few years ago. And what I was trying to show here is see the variances that you see, source 1, source 3, source 4, source 5. There's very little variance in how, from one to another, because I'm looking at 3 different positions. I'm looking at job 1, job 2, job 3. I think it was like a receptionist or an admin assistant and an IT position and another position. Look at those last 2 data points. Lot of variability. Much more variability in those two data points than in the others. Anybody want to guess which ones are online survey sources? Pay attention to where you're getting your data, because you can be way, way off without realizing it. Free is not necessarily better. Free is not necessarily good. You might end up with exactly the wrong information. There are antitrust guidelines that are in effect, which means that we cannot price fix, and that includes we cannot fix salaries, we cannot collude to fix salaries. Why do we care? Because there have been a lot of cases out of Arizona and Texas last year where groups of HR professionals are getting together and sharing information, sharing salary information, and it's perceived as colluding to limit salary expenses. And so you need to be very careful when you're sharing your salary information with others. You need to be very careful about that. Public sector, not a big deal because that's all public information, but privately held companies and the organizations that have gotten in trouble have been in healthcare and in financial services. You can share retrospective information, so information about what has happened in the past is less potentially damaging than what you're going to do about increases going forward. They prefer that you use a third party or you have someone compile the information so that not any one person doesn't know what everybody else is making. They like to have at least 5 or more companies providing data in, and there has to be enough information so that no one person can tell which company was which participant. For example, if Boeing and 5 of their suppliers got together, it'd be pretty easy to tell how many went by just by looking at the number of employees in each bucket, which one Boeing was. So again, you have to be able to, you should not be able to identify any specific participant. So just be aware of this. This is something that a lot of us forget about, but it's still on the radar screen for the regulatory agencies. One of the biggest potential problems we see with compensation analysis is the job matching process. Every job is a little bit different. There's never going to be an exact match. So if you have employees who tell you, well, my job's not identical to anybody else's, you can say, you're absolutely right. Nobody's is. But what we look for is the scope of responsibilities, is the skill set, is the education and experience that's required to perform the duties essentially the same. If they are essentially the same, and we look, again, in compensation land where I live, we look for a 70 to 80% overlap in those functional areas, and if those functional areas, that scope and education and experience overlap 70 to 80%, then we say yes, it's a match. We could hire somebody with similar skill set into this position, or we could lose somebody to this position. To do the benchmarking analysis, we look at benchmark jobs. On the left-hand side of the screen are your cross-industry jobs: accounting clerk, accountant, receptionist, admin assistant. Those are benchmark jobs that we commonly understand across multiple industries. In the other column are jobs that we might see in specific industries, like an RN you're only going to see in healthcare, a teller you're only going to see in finance. So these are industry-specific benchmark jobs. You wouldn't want to conduct a market analysis in the financial services industry without having a teller. You wouldn't want to conduct one in healthcare without having an RN as a benchmark. So we benchmark those jobs that are commonly understood, and the other jobs that are not considered benchmarks, we try and slot in to where we think it makes sense. First, make sure that the salary survey you're using is actually good. Benchmarks are the key. Match the job, not the title. There's a couple of compensation self-help books out there that say to match titles. Never ever match titles, because one person's administrative assistant is another person's office clerk. 70 to 80% of the job overlap is a good match. Look at the data annually. Remember that the survey data is an indicator only. It's an indicator of what the market rate is. You need to age the data. Here's what I want you to remember. Good compensation data may be expensive, but it's not as expensive as bad compensation data. if you look at it from that rational perspective of what percentage is it of our salary budget, and could we pay for all of our salary surveys simply by overpaying or underpaying one position, and in 99.99% of the time that is absolutely the case. So I think that's the way that HR approaches getting budget dollars for these salary surveys. It's not, well, we want the right data. It's, look, this is a huge expense. What if we want to make sure that that huge expense is being managed appropriately?